Good morning. Today is July 1st, 2024. My name is Ateem Aneda George. I'm a Green Fellow with the Library of Congress. I have the pleasure of interviewing Ava Rogers today. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ava, let's begin by discussing your origin story.
Sure. And thanks for having me today, team. My name is Ava Rogers, and I am originally from New Orleans. I was born and raised here. Well, actually, I was born in Chicago, but raised here and lived here my entire life until I left to go to college at the age of 18 in Washington, D.C. But there's an interesting story as to how I chose Georgetown University to matriculate at for my undergraduate studies. And that was because I was maybe in high school, maybe even middle school at the time of apartheid. It was Trans-Africa was very public and prominent in the news. And I would see the Trans-Africa protest every night on the nightly news. And I was learning more and more about South Africa and learning more and more that the United States was not on the right side. And so I remember one day I asked my high school teacher, my favorite teacher, Mr. Wallace Merritt, who's in charge of that? Who makes those decisions? Because I don't like what we're doing. And he said, it's the State Department. And I said, well, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to join the State Department. And so I had an opportunity when I was a junior in high school to go to a summer program at Georgetown University based on standardized test scores. And there, I, of course, learned much more about the Foreign Service. And that really cemented my desire to work in international affairs and really to be a voice, I hoped, of change and to ensure that when we defined U.S. national interests, we defined them based on the interests of all American citizens and not just some American citizens. And so I went to Georgetown and I joined the Foreign Service directly after graduation. I think we finished school in May, and I was in the Foreign Service by August of that year. We had a relatively small A100 class, and your A100 class is what they call your orientation class. And I think there were about 30, 40 or so of us in my A100 orientation class. This is the cohort with whom you join the Foreign Service. And I was the only African American person in my class. But I made lifelong friends and was really proud to be there. And as I said, to hopefully help shift and inform U.S. foreign policy. My first assignment was Jamaica. And everybody's like, "Ooh, Jamaica, you must be on the beach every day." And yes, that was partially true. I was on the beach pretty much every day. But it was also a really busy and rewarding assignment. Jamaica is at that time was I think it was the fifth busiest post in terms of consular affairs, and consular affairs or visas for people who would like to visit the United States or who are immigrating to the United States, and American Citizen Services. So people who have retired to Jamaica, for example, and they have a problem with their Social Security check, or unfortunately, people who perhaps flouted the laws and went to jail. And we would visit them in jail and ensure that they had access to lawyers, et cetera. So that was my first assignment. After that, I went to Africa for my first assignment in Africa, and that was in Congo Brazzaville. Congo Brazzaville is a small country. Most people know its neighbor, its next door neighbor, Congo Zaire, which is a much bigger country. But in Congo Brazzaville, I was the economic and consular officer. And some of the things that we worked on were ensuring that American businesses had a level playing field for investments in the country. Also trying to help ensure that they were good stewards and good corporate citizens when they did invest in a particular country, looking at human rights, democratization, and of course, consular affairs, the same type of consular affairs that I was involved in Jamaica. And towards the end of my tour, really had to put those consular services to work because civil war broke out at the end of the tour. And there were a number of American citizens living in the country, many of whom were missionaries or people working on a lot of environmental projects who were living in the country. And our job as the U.S. Embassy is, of course, to try to help provide safe passage for American citizens, green card holders, and certain third country nationals. And so it was while I was on a mission to help try to get some American citizens to the airport so that we could then get them out. Myself and some of my colleagues, all of whom we just all happened to be African American, our car was ambushed by rebels. I'm not sure who. I think it was a case of mistaken identity, but unfortunately, they shot first and asked questions later. And so, but I'm here to tell the story because it was an armored vehicle. And so even though the car was riddled with bullets and even large caliber bullets from rocket propelled grenades, RPGs, which are like little shoulder held gun, we all survived to tell the story. And we explained that we did not have any vested interest in this battle between the government and the rebels. That our interest was peace, and that we were just on a mission to try to evacuate American citizens. And so that was fine with them, but they could not get us back to our embassy at the time because, again, we were just really in the middle of a war zone. And so they held us at an open air encampment where you could just hear the bullets whizzing overhead. But eventually we all made it back to safety. And, so did our American citizens. But, while we were able to reach safety, it was really a tragic time in Congo Brazzaville's history with tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives and being displaced. And
that was something else, and I am glad that you lived to tell the tale, Miss Rogers. So what did you do? You were evacuated, I imagine.
yes, we were evacuated. And for me, it was the end of my tour. In any case, I think I literally had like 2 weeks left to go. And so it was the end of my tour. I was coming back to Washington in any case. And so I came back to Washington, D.C. Well, at first, I stayed in Congo, Zaire, the country next door, to help conclude the evacuation operations. And then came back to Washington, D.C., where I was excited to be the Rwanda Burundi desk officer. And so this would have been in 1995, which was just a year after the Rwandan genocide. And so it was an important time to work on issues in Central Africa and in Rwanda in particular. There was a lot of high-level interest on Rwanda and really a big commitment to help the country in its healing path and in its rebuilding path after the tragic genocide of 1994. And so there I had the opportunity to work with many high-level officials from the White House, as well as inside the State Department, Assistant Secretary of State. I traveled with her regularly. We had a presidential visit to Rwanda during that period as well. Several presidential special envoys, just a real whole of government commitment to helping to rebuild Rwanda. And I'm just going to pause you for 1 second.
Yes.
As I was saying, it was a time of high level interest on Rwanda. I was really proud to be part of the rebuilding process, particularly just given how the international community had failed Rwanda during the genocide. It felt good to be a part of the at least try to be a part of the healing and restorative process. Um, After that assignment, I got the opportunity to study languages for 2 years because my onward assignment was Israel and the Gaza Strip. So I studied Arabic for a year in Washington, D.C., and then a follow on year in Tunisia. That was really terrific, studying languages. I love languages. And so that was really exciting time as well. And then I went to Israel, Tel Aviv. I was based in Tel Aviv. My apartment was in Tel Aviv, but my portfolio was the Gaza Strip. I was the economic officer at the time. And it was a really exciting time to be there. It was, quite soon after the Oslo Peace Accords. There was a lot of hope in the international community that we were just on the precipice of having a Palestinian state. And so my job was to work with Palestinian institutions, their Congress, their chambers of commerce, other civil institutions to try to strengthen them in preparation for this Palestinian state. However, soon after I arrived, there was the second Intifada erupted. Intifada means uprising in Arabic, revolt, uprising. That was in response to a lot of long-standing issues, but the most proximate cause was a visit to a site in Jerusalem that was deemed provocative, a holy site that is deemed holy by both sides, and that was deemed provocative, and that was the spark that lit the match. But the match would not have been lit were it not for the underlying issues, and that was that the peace process was moving quite slowly and not showing dividends for the people at that time. And so the second Intifada erupted. And I had to switch from car diplomacy because prior to that, drive down to Gaza quite regularly, like at least 3 times a week. We would just drive down. It's only an hour and a half drive from Tel Aviv to Gaza. But during one of the drives, unfortunately, after the Intifada erupted, some of my colleagues were killed in their vehicle as they were just doing routine work down in Gaza. And so that, of course, curtailed our movements, and we shifted to what I call telephone diplomacy, where we were talking with our colleagues, our contacts in Gaza via phone, to try to ascertain what was happening on the ground, and to still try to use diplomacy to help assist in quelling the violence. My job really shifted at that time. At first, it was more economic work and looking at trade associations and that type of stuff. And it really shifted to more of a humanitarian role after the Intifada erupted, and looking at how can we make sure, quite similar to today, that ambulances have access and are able to move freely throughout the Gaza Strip, that food and medicine and water, those types of things can get in. So I did that in concert with my USAID colleagues and with the large United Nations contingency.
Excuse me. USAID is
The United States Agency for International Development. So working in concert with them and with my United Nations colleagues to ensure humanitarian relief in the Gaza Strip during that period. Because the United States has such a close relationship with Israel. My job was not to deliver the humanitarian relief, but rather to help be a liaison between United Nations agencies and the Israeli government to ensure that these goods and services, these vitally, critically life-saving goods and services, were able to move during that period.
How long did you work in Israel and the Gaza Strip?
3 years. So I was there from 2001 to 2004. Um, After that assignment, I went to Nigeria, where I served as the political and economic chief based in Lagos. And my job there was to oversee the section, oversee the political reporting, the economic reporting that our offices were doing, focused on the southern states of, I think it's 27 southern states of southern Nigeria, working in close contact with our colleagues in Abuja, the capital. One of the primary things that we focused on was the large oil investments in the Niger Delta region, looking at, on the one hand, ensuring that there was a level playing field for American companies to also participate. But on the other hand, really looking at the environmental degradation in the region and trying to ensure that all actors were good corporate citizens, supporting civil society institutions who were working on human rights and environmental rights in that region as well, in addition to basic democratization and civil society participation.
What were some of the challenges and opportunities you faced in Nigeria?
Some of the challenges were just the enormity of the task, particularly in the Niger Delta region. The region had been so very degraded for decades, and it was just really heartbreaking to travel down there and to see people who live in an area which should be the richest area of the country, perhaps even one of the richest areas of the entire continent. But the people who lived in the Niger Delta, did not have access to clean water, clean air, where their livelihoods were taken away from them because they were not able to fish the waters because they were so polluted. And so the enormity of the task was quite challenging. But again, certainly kudos to the organizations that have been doing this work for decades, often putting their very lives on the line to ensure that the next generation can have access to basic things that are necessary for life, such as clean water and clean air.
Wonderful. And so after Nigeria, what did you do?
So I actually did not complete my tour in Nigeria because I was contacted by a UN colleague with whom I'd worked in Israel and Palestine. And as I mentioned earlier, worked with a large contingency of UN colleagues in Israel, just given the Second Intifada and the dire humanitarian needs. And so a colleague contacted me. He was at that time based in Sudan and asked if I was interested in coming to join the UN mission in Sudan. And so I ran that up the pole with State Department officials, and they were in agreement, given the importance that Sudan had on U.S. interests as well. And so I was able to go on loan, it was called secondment, to the United Nations. And so I went to Khartoum, and my portfolio was Darfur. And this was, quite soon after the genocide in Darfur. And my job was to work on the peace process. The peace negotiations were held in Abuja, actually in Nigeria. So even though I just left Nigeria, I would fly back for the peace talks and representing the United Nations at those peace talks, providing technical assistance to the parties on conflict resolution, conflict mediation, um, and of course, doing political reports to the United Nations headquarters in Khartoum and in New York about how the peace processes were going. The peace processes were held under the auspices of the African Union. So it was really an opportunity to have a true multilateral experience working with the United Nations, the African Union, and people from all around the world. And it was really my time in Sudan and my time working for the United Nations was really one of the most gratifying experiences of my entire international career. I really appreciated the perspective of working for a global organization and feeling as if I was able to work on behalf of humanity, irrespective of one's national interests.
Sounds fascinating. What were the years that you served with the United Nations? And
You're the 2004 to 2006, if I'm not mistaken. I You don't quote me on those years, but roughly there. I initially started off in Khartoum, as I mentioned, often traveling to Abuja for the peace talks. And then after the peace talks concluded, I asked to be deployed to the field because while I was at the peace talks, I would, of course, hear about everything that was going on in Darfur. And I had many great UN colleagues who were reporting regularly, and we were feeding that information into the process. But I wanted to see it firsthand. I wanted to be on the ground and to meet with people. And so I was deployed to Janina, which is the west of Darfur, right on it's the most western region near the border with Chad. Very, very remote region. And but really just rewarding, again, working with colleagues from all over the world, from all of the UN agencies, WHO, WFP, UNICEF, that whole alphabet soup. But what you know about all of these agencies these are the agencies that are delivering life-saving assistance to people all around the world, day in and day out. So we're talking about clean food, clean water, sanitation. These are the agencies that I got the chance to work with and had the honor to lead while I was the head of office in Janina and in the West Darfur.
fascinating. You had mentioned earlier, Ava, that you were involved in conflict resolution and conflict mitigation. Is that something that you studied when you were at Georgetown, or how did you pick up those skills?
I was not formally trained in them. I mean, Georgetown School of Foreign Service is a well-rounded degree program in foreign service and diplomacy and international relations in general. But I think I learned those skills on the ground by working primarily in countries where there was a lot of conflicts. And so I worked in Congo Brazzaville, where, as I mentioned, a civil war erupted at the end. Certainly, honed the skills in Israel and Palestine, looking at the conflicts there, and in Nigeria as well, looking at the conflicts between the different political parties and different regions. And so it was a skill set that I learned on the ground through my previous years and my previous assignments.
What was next? What was in store for you after your UN experience?
So after my UN experience, I returned to my hometown of New Orleans, and by this time it was soon after Hurricane Katrina. I think it was a year or two after Katrina. I can't remember if I came back in 2006 or 2007. Hurricane Katrina was in 2005. And as you, of course, know, my hometown was completely decimated. People were displaced for well over a year. So I was really interested to see if I could translate and use any of the skills that I had developed over the years working internationally, if I could contribute a little bit to my hometown of New Orleans. And so I was fortunate enough to be awarded a Una Chapman Cox sabbatical which is a sabbatical award that you can compete for as a Foreign Service officer. And it's really a chance for people to reset and to reconnect with the United States. And you write a proposal of a project that you want to work on for the year. And my project was that I just want to volunteer in New Orleans for a year. And so I came home, I volunteered with a wonderful organization that was really supporting regular, everyday people, neighbors. And the goal of that organization was to help beef up their abilities to participate in really important decisions and in the democratic process. Because at the time, important decisions were being made about the future of New Orleans. Which areas should be rebuilt, which areas should not be rebuilt, what should happen to our flood protections. So really important decisions were being made, and it was important that citizens had the capacity and the confidence to be able to go down to City Hall and or go to any of the community planning meetings and to feel as if they had a voice in those decisions. And so the organization worked on educating people, making sure that people knew that the meetings were happening, and letting them know what the issues were that were on the table so that they could meaningfully participate in the future of their city. And so that was the policy work of the organization. It also really helped build connections between neighborhoods. We already are a community where neighbors look out for neighbors. We want to make sure that a neighborhood in one side of town could have connections with a neighborhood on another side of town. So really bringing neighborhoods together across the city. And then some direct service work of using all of the many gracious volunteers, such as volunteers from universities, to help come in and rebuild houses, paint roofs, not paint houses and put on roofs, those types of things.
What next?
After that assignment, let's see, I went to Washington, D.C., and I worked in Congress for the House Foreign Affairs Committee. That was what's called a Pearson Fellow. And these are fellowships between the State Department and Congress to really build connectivity between those two institutions, between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And the main project that I worked on during that time was looking at were there ways to revise and update the United States Foreign Assistance Act law. It was quite outdated. It had been around for decades, and some of the provisions really were a hindrance in the field. And so, they were slowing down aid unintentionally just because it was an old law that needed to be updated. So with my colleagues, helped organize a series of roundtables, brief legislators to work on that project. Unfortunately, as we know with Congress, these things take a long time. So the law was not updated, but I think that we did raise awareness about some of the important issues. One of the passion projects that I worked on while I was there was also informed by my direct, lived experience working overseas. And that was that I saw firsthand that there was a need for more helicopters in emergency aid situations. The United Nations needed more helicopters. And so really working to try to help bring about that, help shore up support within the United States for the United Nations as the global arm to deliver humanitarian aid.
Wonderful. And then what did you do, Ms. Rogers?
After that assignment, I went to Sudan. Yes, it's I had to always think about the years, and so I went to Sudan as Southern Sudan as consul general. This was before independence. And what an exciting time to be in Southern Sudan. The excitement was just in the air. I mean, I remember like a driver for the embassy. He came into my office one day, and I was just like, "How you doing?" And he was like, "I'm so excited." The vote wasn't until a whole nother year, but you could just feel it coming. He was excited about the prospects, the dream of the future of finally having an independent state. And so it was an exciting time to work there. Again, work closely with my colleagues from the United States Agency of International Development. Southern Sudan at the time was the largest USAID program in sub-Saharan Africa. So, hundreds of millions of dollars looking at how we could participate as partners in helping to build up the country in preparation for independence. And so really some important projects in terms of building roads and schools and literacy. Literacy was a big issue. And it was so gratifying to see the excitement and to see people getting the support and the resources that were required. So that was preparation for it was called the referendum. The referendum was where people would vote to whether they wanted to remain part of Sudan or become their own independent state. There was a lot of political work as well to just keep the peace process on track. And despite this time of hope and opportunity, there were still humanitarian crises in the region. It's a huge region, and so again, I had the opportunity to work with UN colleagues on again providing basic services, food, water, sanitation. And I left right before the vote, and as you know, Southern Sudan did vote for independence and became the world's newest independent country. But unfortunately, the peace process and all of that hope dissipated, and the situation there is quite troubling.
And leaving Sudan, were you transferred on to an onward assignment?
Yes, I was transferred on to Namibia, where I served as the deputy chief of mission. This is my final assignment in the Foreign Service. And Namibia is a quite small country, very beautiful country, but the major U.S. Intervention or policy program there is working to, at that time, was working to help combat HIV and AIDS. One of the most successful U.S. foreign policies in Africa was PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Policy for AIDS Relief. And at that time, Southern Africa had been one of the largest recipients of this aid, and it was a point where we were gradually scaling down that assistance in recognition that while the problem still existed, it was not an emergency as it had been in the previous years. And so, how could we scale down the assistance gradually and responsibly to ensure that the gains that had been made were not lost? And so that involved a lot of work with my colleagues from USAID, as well as the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, and of course the national government, and helping to make sure that the Namibian health system was ready to take the baton and carry on this work.
So you mentioned that was your last assignment in the Foreign Service. How many years did you spend with the State Department?
20 years.
So did you retire?
I took early retirement. I decided that I wanted to, again, come back home to New Orleans after being away for 20 years and see if my skills could transfer back in a domestic context. And so prior to coming back, I went to graduate school for a year because I'd never gone to graduate school. And so I completed it's called a mid-career graduate degree at Harvard Kennedy School, and then returned back home to New Orleans. And since returning back home, I've worked in a variety of roles. I've worked for the city government, as well as a number of nonprofits. And I'm currently consulting, but the through line through all of that work is mission driven work. You know, how can I help contribute and help people be and achieve their goals and aspirations.
We're coming to the end of this interview, and I wonder if you would take a moment to speak to the future of diplomacy and international affairs, and maybe a word to the young person out there listening or viewing this recording.
Sure. I certainly found my 20 years of foreign service to be tremendously rewarding, and would encourage young people to consider a career in international affairs, whether it's through the State Department, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, Peace Corps, or through multilateral institutions such as the United Nations. That it is, I think I didn't realize until after I had left the Foreign Service just how meaningful the work was, and the opportunity to travel and see the world, and just to play a small part in helping to make the world a better place. Unfortunately, if you look around today, many of the countries where I have served are still in the news today, and that shows that that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and certainly that as a practitioner in foreign policy, that you cannot solve the problems, but what you can do is walk hand by hand, hand in hand, alongside the people in the country who are doing the work, and help support them in creating a brighter future.
Thank you so very much. This has been a very rich and interesting interview. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.